Hi, this is Diana Effner, and I'm working up the courage to begin my series of demos on painting on porcelain with Jo Sonjas artist acrylics. I've been painting with these paints since 2007 on vinyl, and I'm pretty comfortable with them painting on vinyl, but when it comes to painting on porcelain, I am still in the experimental stage. There's so many different things to try, and porcelain is a little different than vinyl. So rather than wait till I have absolutely mastered painting on porcelain, I'm inviting you to join me in the learning process of learning to paint on porcelain with acrylic paints. You can watch me as I experiment, and I also encourage you to try your own experiments, and then we can share what we discover on this forum. And one thing I do want to suggest and encourage you to do if you want to learn to paint realistic portrait type dolls is to collect some reference material in the form of photographs. This is how I learned to paint realistically, by studying actual people and photographs of actual people. So this is really important to have reference material when you're painting realistically. So this photograph is kind of on the faded side. The color's not great because it's faded with time. It's pretty old. But I can still learn and get a lot of information even from this photograph, just looking at the shapes and the details and the highlights and the shadows. So it's a useful photograph. Here's a better one. It's from a studio, and you can see a lot of color in this face. Just to give you an idea, this unpainted head is pretty monochrome, and you can see how there are so many other tones. There's so many other tones of color in this photograph. It gives me a lot of ideas of colors that I can add, cool colors and warm colors and gold tones and purples and a whole rainbow of colors. So this is where I get my ideas for adding colors. I also learned a lot from working with Debbie on the Huggy Bear video and the colors that she had developed. And here's another studio shot that has a lot of nice color in it. Here's one that's I'm pretty sure it's faded to a kind of a pale bluish pink, which is really pretty, but it's not going to work with this head. We're not going to be able to achieve anything like that. This would be a good one to use if you were going to if you started with a white porcelain head, which you can do. You can pour white porcelain and get a more ethereal color scheme. So get a lot of inspiration from studying the colors here. And this one is a lot more like the color that we have going here. So I can get a lot of ideas for painting on this head from looking at this photo. The big challenge of painting with these paints on porcelain is that it's a little bit like painting on paper with watercolor, because the paints are transparent, and once you put the paint down, it's not easy to take it off. So we add it very gradually, and I'm going to demonstrate on the next demo how I mix the colors and dilute them, and how I apply them for the flesh tones, and on getting ready to do the features. We'll start with the flesh tones and then do the features on a later demo. So stay tuned for the next demo. Hello, this is Diana Effner, and I'm planning to do a demo on how I apply a basic blush or the blush layers to porcelain bisque using the Jo Sonjas artist colors. These parts have been primed with golden porcelain restoration glaze, and I did a previous video explaining how to apply that. I think it's a good idea to do 2 coats of the glaze, allowing it to dry in between coats, and also, well, the porcelain has to be completely clean and oil-free before the first coat, and then the second coat needs to be checked thoroughly for dust particles, which either are trapped in the first coat or have been settled on the piece while the drying, waiting for the second coat. So I remove the loose particles with a clean brush, and then I check for particles that are in the glaze, and they are usually pretty easy to remove with a toothpick. And I dampen the toothpick, and let's see if I can find a piece. Here's a particle here. Just dampen the toothpick and very gently, using the side of the toothpick more than the tip, in a circular motion, the dust comes loose and you can wipe it off. And then you can apply the second coat, and then before you begin to paint, do the dust inspection one more time. This will almost always dislodge the dust, and you can wipe it off. Okay. Okay, now I'm getting ready to mix up the colors for the blushing layers. I'm wearing a cotton glove just to minimize the amount of oil that I'm putting on the porcelain as I'm handling the head, which might be a good idea, but it's more important when you're applying the restoration glaze in the beginning. I don't know if it's absolutely necessary to wear a glove while you're painting, but if you get comfortable with wearing it, it can't hurt. So, anyway, first I have to demonstrate how to mix the colors. And, well, I have my sponges handy for applying the blush, and this is the brush I like to use, applying the paint to the sponge. And I'm going to mix the colors on my slant bed palette, because for the blush colors we need a lot of water. The paint is very diluted, and that's what I'm going to show you now, how to mix the colors and how much water you need to put in. Here is my Stay Wet palette with the colors just out of the tube. They've been on here for a while, so they've kind of melted from the moisture in the palette. And I'm going to select various colors and mix them on the Stay Wet palette. These 2 colors are the ones that I use for a very soft flesh tone, like peaches and cream type of color. And then as we get into the more brilliant blush colors, I will add some of this color, which is called brown madder. I don't know why it's called brown madder, because it's a deep red, as you can see, and purple madder, which is a maroonish type of purple, which when it's highly diluted, it's a very beautiful rose pink color. And sometimes I use burnt sienna because it's diluted, it's a flesh tone, which can be altered by adding other colors. And sometimes raw sienna is used if I want a more golden tone, flesh tone, for like painting blondes, for example. So I'm going to, I'm going to start mixing. All right. Here's my Stay Wet palette. And by the way, I like to keep a damp sponge handy for keeping the paints from drying out if I'm going to be walking away or even not using some of the colors, because they are air dry and they dry out fairly quickly. But these colors are going to have a lot of water in them, so the reason I'm using the palette is that I need to put a lot of water in them, so I can't work from the palette, directly from the palette. I really need to water these down. So I'm going to start by just mixing up a little bit of the plum pink and adding some water, a little bit of water. Here, the brush that I'm using for mixing is an inexpensive acrylic brush. I like to use these with the plastic handles because they're very hardy and durable, and they take a lot of abuse because they're constantly in the water. I wouldn't use a good expensive brush for this process. It's got nice bristles, very springy. So sometimes I get the paint off with water, and I'm already getting a very diluted color. You can see how thin it is. All right. Now I'm going to mix up some of the green, the moss green, very yellow green. I use this color to tone down the pink and make it more like a flesh tone. And depending on the proportions I use of the green to the pink, I can get a great range of flesh tones. A typical flesh tone might have about 2 parts of the green and 1 part of the pink, which is very intense. And this could be a nice sort of peachy flesh tone. And if I find I want more green, because there have been times when I needed to apply more green directly to the porcelain to get the color of flesh tone I would like to have. All right, now for the technique, hang on. I apply the paint to the sponge, and then I apply it to the piece. And you might want to start practicing on the other parts and get warmed up before you feel confident to start on the head. So, and then you can see how the colors are working out for you. Okay, I'm going to use this for a peaches and cream, and sometimes I put a little bit of water down. What I want is color right on the surface, so I don't want to saturate this sponge with water. I want just a very light film of water on the surface of the brush, of the sponge. So that's why I use this brush, because it's got, this is a comb, I think they call it. It's got these little sparse bristles at the tip, and if I clean the brush and blot it and then put it into the paint, I'm just picking up a very little bit of paint right on the tip, and then I apply it to the sponge in a cross-hatch motion so that most of the color is right in the middle of that sponge, and there's lighter color along the edge. That's one way that I can control how much color I'm putting on. This is just a very, very, very light. Now, I don't know how much this is going to show up actually on this very porcelain, because the porcelain is a pretty rich color, but I can see a change on there. So I apply it with the middle of that color spot where I want the most color, and then it sort of fans out from there. And to feather the edges, I tamp with the part of the sponge that's dry and free of paint. I'm just putting color along the edge here, and you'll actually use up, if you don't have too much, all that color fairly quickly, and then start in the middle, and then when some of the paint is off the brush, some of the color, you can go out to the edges and pull the color in. Just a little bit rosier. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'll show you what I would do on the hand, for example. I think I got a little bit more on there this time. I don't go all the way out to the edge because I don't want to paint edges. I just want to paint a soft area with feathered edges. I tend to put the blush in the fleshy areas. The fingertips have a lot of color, so I keep adding layers of color to the fingertips. And if you want to get into a smaller area when you're applying brush, it's okay to apply it with a brush, and then this is a good brush. Use dry as a blender. It's a Maxine's mop, and just up and down to blend the edges of that. Don't ever let the edges dry, because it will form a line where you don't want a line. You always have to blend out the edges when you're applying the wet paint. Okay. This is very relaxing. Wherever you would put, if you've done reborning, you're familiar with this type of process. Looks like I'm going to have to mix up a little more color before I start on the head. showing you the basic technique I use for layering the blush. If you want heavier colors, sometimes you might want to just brush it directly on and then blend with a sponge. This is a very light tone. You're not going to see a dramatic difference here, and we don't want to see dramatic differences as we're layering the colors. We want a gradual buildup of color, because if you put too much paint on and you decide that it's not what you wanted, it's difficult to remove. That is the big challenge of air dry paint. It's not like the China paint that we're used to, where we can just wipe it off and start again. So we go at it with a little more caution. All right. Put a little bit of blush on the cheeks now. And I always start in the place where I want the most color and then work out from there. And then, because you deposit the color and then pretty soon there's less color on the sponge, and then you can go out to the areas where you want a little bit of less color. And now it's a good idea to let this completely dry before adding another layer. And as I have said before, everything is an experiment at this point. I've done quite a bit of this, but I still haven't answered all of the questions that I have in my mind about all these different mediums and what is going to finally work the best for creating dolls that hold up and last. But it's funny that nowadays, with the ball-jointed doll people, there's much less concern about the paint holding up and lasting for a long time. In fact, it turns out they're more concerned about being able to take the paint off and do it again at some point. So they're careful to use things that don't permanently stain the resin, ball-jointed dolls. So it's another way of looking at the whole process of painting dolls. Okay, that's the basic technique. In the next demo, I'm going to show some other colors that I can layer, but first I have to let the paint dry before I add another layer. So, and it will also be starting to work on a little bit of contour shading and painting the lips, and eventually we'll paint the eyes and the eyebrows. Stay tuned. Hi, I want to do a little bit of work on the lips. The first blush on the lips, I'm going to use one part of the moss green and one part of the plum pink, watered down, not quite as watery as the blush, a little bit richer color, but not much, still very watery. And I'm going to apply it to the lips. And soften the edge. I don't want an outline yet. I'm going to postpone outlining the lips, and just focus the color in the center of the mouth and then soften the edge. On the upper lip, it's okay to think about the outline or the shape of the lips that you want and apply it, but soften it. So it's a little bit vague. You might want to change it as you go. This color is going to be just... Now you can add a little bit more color. Here is the big question in my mind. I've heard from a lot of sources that you need to add medium to your paint, or it's not going to adhere properly. Well, I've tried different mediums, and I still feel more comfortable with just adding water, and it doesn't seem to me to make a lot of difference. But I am going to apply a varnish over this. There's the danger if it doesn't adhere to that the other layers, as you apply other layers, it's going to disturb that underlayer. But I haven't found that to be the case. And has any of you tried this? I'm interested in your feedback and your experience. Because as I've said before, I don't have all the answers to my own questions. Because this is all an experiment. So this is going to give me sort of a light highlight color, and I will be adding other colors as I go. Now I want to mix up a color for contour shading. So I'm going to make a color that is just a tiny bit darker than the porcelain and a slightly cooler shade. I'm going to start with burnt sienna and add some water. To that. And when this color is very diluted, it's very close to a flesh color. You can see. And then when you paint and you create shadows, every painter knows that you add the opposite color or a complementary color. With this being kind of an orangey color, I would add blue. I'm going to take some of this. This is Payne's Gray, but it's really a deep blue. So it's a good color for shading when you want to create shadow. And I think that I see purple when I see shadows on the flesh. I see just a tinge of purple, and the Reborners use a purplish color for what they call the crease color. So I like this purple madder. It's a very reddish purple. So to get the purple I want, I need to combine it with the blue. So I'm going to clean my brush and blot it and mix some of the sienna and then add a touch of the blue. I think that's too much. Well, let's see. And a touch of the purple. I'm thinking it's too purple and I need more sienna for a contour color. A nice contour color. I might have to use all of this. I think I'm liking that color for the contour color. So I'm going to dilute it some more. And we'll just see how it goes as a contour shade. I'm going to use this filbert type of brush and start with a hand maybe and see how that color looks as a shading color. What's that? I'm going to put it remember to not allow puddles of color to dry. Or you'll get some edges that you may not want. Using the Maxine mop to blend out the color. I'm just going to use just a tiny bit of paint right in the tip of the brush because I don't want a puddle of paint. I just want to control the amount of paint that goes on. If you get too much, you can pick up your sponge and mop it up. I think this color works to start building up layers on the fingernails. Very light color. What's that? foot. Wherever you want a shadow. Oops. Whoops. Here, the upper lip. The lip has a crease. The upper lip is in shadow. So I add a shadow to the upper lip there. I want to say one thing. Make sure that if you're using a sponge or a brush for blending and tamping the color, make sure that it's not wet. Make sure it's dry, because if you accidentally use a brush or a sponge that's too wet, you might actually be picking up some of the paint that you've put down instead of blending it. And you might end up with a light spot that you didn't want. So keep your blender dry. If you're careful, I think you can keep adding layers, because when you're just using water, the paint dries up really quickly. And unless you start to have a problem where you're picking up the paint instead of adding a layer. I do get impatient. I want to keep going. I want to stop and let it dry. Seems like it's pretty dry. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna finish off camera and come back with another layer soon. Stay tuned. Okay, what's next? What's the next layer going to be, and where am I going with this? All of this. Earlier I talked about having reference material handy, and I believe that is really important. If you're going for a realistic look or you need some inspiration. So I'm going to take some cues from studying this photograph, because I like the colors, and I'm comparing the head that I'm working on to the photograph to get ideas for where I might go with the contour shades and the blush colors that I'm going to be adding. I'm seeing a deeper purplish color around the eyes, and a deeper sort of reddish brown color on the cheeks, and shading on the forehead, more of that reddish brown color. So I think for the next color I'm going to mix up a color that will bring me more to this shade for the next wash. I'm actually seeing more purple, so I'm going to start with that, something similar to the contour color. Debbie used the contour color for a wash when we painted Huggy Bear, and I was pleased with how that worked out. So I think I'm going to try that on this head. Be back in a minute. Okay, I wish that it was possible to show you exactly what color. I know that it's hard to tell exactly what color and how much water I'm talking about. You can see how transparent this paint is. And this is a color very much like the color we used for the contour shading, but watered down even more. It's approximately 2 parts burnt sienna, well, maybe not a whole part of the Payne's Gray, and a whole part of the purple madder, maybe just a touch, like two dabs of this, and just a touch of each of these colors. And it gives a flesh tone with just a hint of purple. And that looks like it might be useful in creating some of the colors on this. So I've got a clean sponge, and I'm going to use that brush, the comb, and just pick up a little bit of the color and lightly paint it on. No, first I'm going to put a little water. Just a trace of water on the surface. I don't want to saturate the sponge. I just want a trace of water and paint on the very surface. Now, starting in the middle, apply the paint, and then go out to the sides. So most of the color is in the middle. Okay, now let's see what happens. If you're applying a wash, it's really just like blush, only over a little bit wider area. Right here where I first put the sponge down, there's a little bit dark. The paint's a little bit dark there. So I'm just moving it around with the dry end of the sponge before it has a chance to set. I think I need a little bit more water in the paint. I'm going to go across. Oh dear. I'm just applying it with the very tips of the bristles, very lightly. I'm doing a quick pounce so that I don't get another blob of the darker color settling into that glaze. I do like that color. I'm going to let it dry before I add another layer. Here's a tip. I probably said this before, but I'm going to say it again. Always start applying the color where you want the most color. And the other thing you can do is add more pressure there. I want the color to be the darkest at the top and then gradually become lighter. So I start at the top, and after I've deposited quite a bit of the paint along the top edge, then I can start to come down, and the sponge is blending the color by repeatedly pouncing, and then I finish at the top again. Applying a blush to the forehead is tricky because it's such a big area. You apply the paint, I want the most color at the top and kind of in the middle, so I start there and make a circle, kind of widening the circle and lightening the pressure and repeating the pouncing. I want a little more blush here, put a little more pressure there. Like so. I don't know if you can see. The color is very subtle, but it makes a difference in the overall tone. Okay. Of course, I always want a lot of color on the ball of the cheek. Now, first, the pressure is very light, and I do some pouncing. I don't want it to get too wet there. And then fanning out and circling back towards the ear and down under the jaw, and then finishing on the cheek. Use some dry wedge around the edges, and we're gradually getting soft shadings of richer color on the face. There's still a little bit of color there. You can keep working with this contour shade color by adding more intensity as you build up layers. And then at some point, you might want a deeper crease color. And to make a deeper crease color, one way to do it would be to add a touch of more blue to this contour shade. Until it looks a bit more like the deeper shadows that you see on the face. You don't want to use a lot of this, but a little bit. A little bit more blue, and now it's more like a purple, less maroon, because there's already red there. I want more blue. Well, if you want to soften an edge that you're not pleased with, you can use the same technique as we used for the dust. While the paint is still somewhat wet, wet a toothpick and just lightly apply a circular motion, and it'll take the surface paint off where you apply the brush. Right here, I'm softening that edge up just a bit. When you start putting deeper colors on, there's a tendency for the color to stain where you put that deeper color, so that the blending doesn't really work as effectively as it does when there's more water in the paint. Okay, what's next? Stay tuned. Studying my photograph again, I see a purplish hue around the eyes, under the eyebrows and the lids and even the lower lids, and there's always this kind of purplish cast along the edge of the lip. So I'm going to I mixed up some very watered down purple by just taking what was left of that contour color I was just using and adding more of the purple matter and another touch of the Payne's Gray, which is this blue here, and getting more of a purple. Now I'm going to start with a brush that's clean and blotted, and then I'm putting it into this very watered down paint, just a tip, and you'll see that already there's a lot of water. I'm going to blot the brush before I put it on here, because I don't want, I mean, you can see how little, such a very little bit of paint. And it's mostly water with just a tint of color. Because I can always add more later. In fact, I might want to add a little bit more blue to this mixture. I'm going to use my sponge. I'm taking a chance and going over it while it's still wet. The shadow that occurs under the lid, under the brow, is going to guide me when I paint the eyebrow. Now the lips. I'm going to let this purple be the outline of the lower lip. I'll put a little on the upper lid too, upper lip. Deepen that a little bit. Do the other eye. Right. Stay tuned for the next layer. I wanted to try to explain a little bit about the cool colors, what I call the undertones of the face. I heard back when I was studying art that all the old masters recognized that everyone has either bluish tones or greenish tones underneath their skin. And when I was painting with Debbie, we mixed up blue and green paint and mixed them together in various shades and put it very thin down paint in the areas where the skin was thin. And if you look at the photographs, you'll see sort of a bluish tint in the areas where the skin is thinner and also where there's a shadow. So I've mixed up some paint with a lot of water, so it's very watery, and I don't want it to look blue. I want it to kind of gray down the reddish or orangish colors, just to give more realism and more interest to the colors. If I just use orange, purple, and red, it's not going to have a balance of colors. I can see green, even when I look at my fingers, I can see a greenish cast underneath the rosy tones that are on the surface. So I'm going to just play around a little bit with the paint and put it at least a few places on the face and just see what happens. Okay, I always see green in this area around the mouth. Now, I don't want to actually paint the skin green. I just want it to be maybe just a very slight tint of color. Where else do I want green? Where it's very thin here. Actually, on my photograph, I see a more bluish tint, so in this area, I'm going to put a little blue. And blue in the shadow, and around the eye. You can always add it to the shaded areas. Seems like in Debbie's class we squiggled a little bit in this area. Okay. Okay, now back to the warm colors. Be right back. One of the colors we used for one of the blush layers, I think, was started out with red, and then we added a little bit of black and maybe some brown. I'm going to see what happens if I just put a little black. And then thin that out. It's a pretty intense rose color. Let's see what that looks like. Maybe I'll start put a little of that on the lips. The lips are pale, and then try it on some of the areas where we need more blush. Remember, the secret to applying the paint is to load your brush so you don't have more paint than you need, so you get a rush and a puddle where you're going to put the paint. I'm just going to pick up a tiny bit with a clean brush and just apply it very carefully, putting it down where I want the most color in the crease. And, oops, I have my blender handy before it gets dry. Okay, we'll come back to the lips in a while. Try my sponge technique. Uh-oh, my brush has red paint in it. I have to clean it out and blot it and get all the paint out of it and blot it really well. And then I'm going to put just a very thin layer of water on my sponge with the tip of the bristles of a clean brush. This brush still has just a little bit of paint in it, but that's okay. A little bit of paint. Now I'm going to pick up a little bit of paint with just the tips of the brush and apply it with strokes where most of the paint is going to be in the middle, with a little bit around the edges. See, like that. Let's try it over here and see what happens. It warms it up a little bit. It's amazing how a little bit of paint can make some difference. And that's what I really wanted to stress in this demo on applying blush, is control of the paint, so you don't get more paint and more color than you want. Just go at it very gradually. Remember, start where you want the most paint. I always like to put the most paint right there next to the mouth, and then on the ball of the cheek, and then gradually go out and then finish back in the middle again. If you want, you can apply a little bit across the bridge of the nose where the sun hits the ridge. Give it a little healthy glow along there. A little bit on the chin. I'm just putting a very little bit of paint. I'm just going into the paint with just the very tip of the brush and putting a very thin layer of paint on my sponge. That little bit of black that I added to the red gives it a softer, cooler tone. It actually softens the color. Who would think that you could soften a color by adding black? I don't like to put red on the end of the nose. Okay, I'm going to try one more color, and then I think you'll have the idea of how to do a blush, and we can go on to the features. I'm just mixing up some purple madder with water. I like using a purple for a blush because I use it a lot when I want to correct the color on a porcelain doll that's been painted with China paint, because the only red we had to blush porcelain was made from iron, which has an orange tinge to it, and if you want something cooler, there really aren't any choices in China paint. So that's one reason I like painting with these paints, because I have so much more range and different tints that aren't available. The reason China paint doesn't have other colors is because the red hue fires out in most materials other than iron. Iron is the only red pigment that doesn't fire out at the high temperatures. So there are some purples, but they don't work for blush. They have gold in them, and they're hard to work with, and they don't work for blush. So, putting this transparent color over what's already there, it may be a little bit too soon to add another layer on this head, because I just finished blushing it with the red. So I'm just going to watch and be very careful. I think it would be better probably to let that color kind of soak in or set or cure or whatever it does, dry thoroughly at least, before applying another layer. But so far I'm just being gentle, and it seems to be working okay. I always like to blush the tops of the ears. You see how it's getting a very healthy glow. I'm going to work on the ears for just a minute. Might want to come back and do some red on the ears. And of course I've got a lot of work to do with these two colors when I finish the hands and feet, especially the fingertips and around the edges of the foot and the toes. I'm not going to demonstrate all of that on this demo, but you get the idea. Stay tuned for more.